A group of friends met one evening after work, 10 of them, and they went down to a local cafe for an evening of dining and relaxation and a social time. And as they're sitting around the table, relaxed and conversing quietly, the subject came up of the international wars that were going on, of the turmoil in political conditions around the world, and of the general unrest and disorder and plain old misery in the world. And they were just discussing with a lot of personal curiosity as to why the world turned so wobbly as it did. And they used the word war a good deal, referring first of all to wars between nations and revolutionary wars within nations. And I also talked about internal wars with which all 10 of them were very well acquainted. And they knew, each one of them, that somehow the wars that were going on inside of them extended themselves outward into society and into nations, which of course was a cause of national and international wars and conflict and heartache and sorrow. And they got a little philosophical about it, and they said, I wonder why it is this way, and I wonder why it has to continue. And they thought further than that, a little deeper, and they said, I wonder if we could track down the actual cause of war, personal and social. I wonder if we're acute enough to track down the cause of war and find out what it is, and maybe the understanding of it would put an end to battles and misery, both externally and internally. I wonder if we could do that. And they were in a light and yet serious mood about it. And they said to themselves, why don't the 10 of us continue with this subject over a period of time to see if we can track down some little trick in human nature, because that must be where it starts. There's something wrong with our minds, with the way we think, with the way we act, with the way we talk. That's obvious enough. But could there be a very specific cause of war, which if we could discover it, perhaps we could find the solution to it, and that would put an end to all the horrors in this world, and also would put an end to our personal unhappiness, because we all have relatives and we have friends, and we've lived in homes where we saw the very small-time wars right within the walls of a home. Why don't we make it an interesting experience for all of us to track this down? And they're all very enthusiastic about it, all 10 of them. And one man who was especially enthusiastic, because he had thought about these things for many years, he said, fine, I'll take the lead in it. I'll go out on my spare time and just look around, just investigate. I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but I'll investigate, and when we meet, perhaps once a week, twice a month, whatever we decide, I'll bring certain topics back for us to discuss to see how far we can go in tracking down the actual cause of human conflict. And I said, fine, you're appointed chairman. So chairman, set the date for the next meeting and we'll discuss things. So several weeks passed, and each time they met, the 10 of them, they discussed, first of all, the basic principles that were fairly clear. They weren't getting too deep yet because they didn't know how to go very deep into this very complex subject. But they did know a few things to start with. And they sat around the table, relaxed in the home of one of the members. And they, first of all, were in agreement that peace treaties do not stop war. Two nations make a peace treaty and then they break it at the earliest convenience. They agreed that leagues of nations and committees between countries, nothing stops war. And they pointed out a matter of historical record that in 2,000 years there have only been 20 years of peace at any one time anywhere in the world. So they came to the very valid conclusion that everything that man has tried up till now doesn't stop war out there or war in here. So that was quite clear in their mind, but that is as far as they could go, because they didn't know where to go next. They knew what wouldn't work, but they didn't know what could work. None of them could come up with that. But one month, after 2 or 3 months of meeting, the chairman decided to go out one night to a political meeting. This was part of his intelligent meandering around, watching human nature in action, trying to see what motivated people. So he went to a political meeting downtown, and there it was with all the usual noise and the political signs and the flags and the pennants and the funny hats that they wear. 2,000 or 3,000 people in the political hall. And it was a debate type. And he sat back quietly in a corner and watched what was going on. And he knew right there was a very close connection between what he was seeing and war in the outer world, and crime for that matter. Because he saw a room full of hostile, agitated, foolish men and women, shaking signs up in the air and yelling into the microphones, accusing each other, and then shouting back, all in the name of trying to elect someone who could bring peace. And yet he knew they weren't peaceful himself. So he watched it and made a few notes. And he noticed that he ran out of paper to write on, so he was looking around for something to put a note on. And he noticed some scraps of paper down at his feet there. So he reached over and picked up 4 or 5 of them and was about to write the note when he noticed something printed on them. And he looked carefully at it, and he was a little bit baffled and yet very curious as what it said. For example, one of the notes said, "Your crisis is to accuse your opponent. Your crisis is to accuse your opponent." Well, he wasn't quite sure what that was doing on a little slip of paper, but there it was. And another little slip of paper said, "Your crisis is to shout back at your opponent." And another little slip of paper says, your crisis is to get up and angrily stalk out of the convention and go home angry. He was wondering what this was all about and whether it might be some kind of a clue in his search for finding the cause of inner and external war. So he had a printer friend, and he visited him the next day, and he said, "Here's some little slips I found. Would you look at them, and could you tell me where they're printed at least? Maybe I could track them down, because I'm on the track of something quite interesting." The printer said, "Yes, I recognize that. Printers get together. We recognize each other's styles of putting out papers. It belongs to a firm out in the outskirts of the city. Here's the address if you like it." So he gave the chairman, the address. Next day, the chairman got up early and drove on out to the outskirts of the city. And sure enough, there's a great big building out there, which is apparently a printing and publishing house. And there's a big parking lot out in front with a lot of people coming in, going out with packages. So he got out of his car and walked up to it. And he saw the sign over the door. And the sign said, "Crisis Creators Incorporated." Crisis Creators Incorporated. And yet it was a printer. So he went inside, and there was a vast room with people wandering around, looking on the tables and on the shelves, with hundreds, thousands of pieces of printed matter. And he investigated them, and sure enough, they were the little slips that he'd found on the floor. And every one of them started with, "Your crisis is," and then it filled in the blank spaces. And it was an endless an endless stream of different ways in which, if a human being followed those instructions, they would have a crisis. He said, this is astonishing, this is amazing. Here's a factory, a printing factory, printing plant, that does nothing but turn out little slips of paper which instruct human beings on how to have a personal crisis. Isn't that strange? No, it isn't so strange. It's quite understandable. Someone has been getting these instructions for a long time in this world, and someone else has been obeying them right down to the last word, because the instructions on there match what is happening in this world. But the whole thing was too overwhelming for him at the start. So he went out in his car, drove home, pondering the immense meaning of it. It was too much. He couldn't take it in. Finally, when he got home, he sat down for a little bit quietly. He knew the answer to every war that has ever been started and fought and ended, causing all the great suffering to nations and to individuals. He knew the cause of every war that he had seen as a boy and as a young man within the walls of his own home. He understood it perfectly. And he understood it so well, he got so excited about it, because he figured now that we know the cause, that human beings want to have a crisis, that they build them every minute, that a crisis gives a sense of purpose. A crisis gives a sense of direction, of doing something necessary and even helpful. This is what people do. They go to the printing shops all over the world and they buy these crises, take them home and obey them, and this is what runs and ruins the entire world. He saw that people couldn't live without the printing instructions they were given, that they must have them. They paid high prices for them. Little slip of paper cost a lot of money because the message was so important to their shattered natures. So when he got into the home, he rushed to the phone and called the other 9 people. He got them all, and he said, I can't tell you what I've discovered. It's too much. Could you come over tomorrow night? And I'll give you the whole story. We've found it. All our hard work is paid off. We've discovered the cause of war. It's too much on the phone, but come over and I'll tell you all about it. And the other 9 got awful excited too, and they said, yes, what time should we be there? He said, I'll come up at 7 o'clock. We'll sit around and I'll tell you what I've found. And when we spread this news around the world, it'll put an end to war, put an end to all the pain and all the idiocy and all the foolishness and all the vanity and egotism that goes around in this world, causing so much grief. 7 o'clock came the next night. Man sat at home, doorbell rang. One by one, his friends came in. It was a cold night, so he said, I'll take your coats, please. And he took their coats and put them in the bedroom on the bed there. They all took their coats off, sat down around the living room. And all the newcomers, the 9 of them, looked very expectantly at what the chairman was going to say. And he repeated what he had repeated to himself for the last 24 hours, that he'd found the answer to wars, which is that human beings must invent one crisis after another. They must keep themselves agitated, and when one human being creates a crisis to another person, the other person takes it eagerly and carries it, keeps it going until they're fighting with each other. And the very war between a husband and wife, or between two brothers or 2 sisters, or between boss and employee or whatever, all these little tiny wars are exactly the same thing as wars in which millions of human beings on each side slaughter each other. He explained it to him, and he explained about the crisis factory, the crisis creators, who made it very handy for anyone who felt that his life didn't have a purpose. We will give you a purpose. Slander someone, hate someone, be jealous of someone. You want a crisis, you name it, and we'll give it to you. And if you don't know what crisis you want, just buy it, pay enough money, and we'll give you enough to last for your lifetime. And if you ever run out, don't dare run out, or you'll run out of your pseudo-purpose in life. You come back, and we'll give you something to do with yourself for the rest of your life. And the very, very foolish people who caused war went down and bought all these false purposes, kept themselves in turmoil in the smallest ways and in the largest ways. And after he talked completely, gave them the complete story for about an hour, they all sat back and they gasped at what they'd heard. And one man sitting over on the couch, he said, "It's astonishing what we've discovered." And he said, "I've got a friend down at the newspaper downtown. I'll go down and see him tomorrow. I know he's eager to hear about this, and he'll run a newspaper report on it, and we'll spread the word around the world. And gradually it'll catch on and wars will cease." Amazing what we have run into. And another lady, she volunteered to do something else. All 9 of them volunteered to spread the information that human beings are caught in the trap of compulsively needing to have a crisis from one moment to the next in order to keep their false lives going. And this is all they know. They know nothing else. Evening went on and got a little late, and they finally said, "Well, we've done enough work we can for tonight." But they all turned toward the chairman who'd made the discovery and thanked him so much, and thanked him for the good he's going to do in the world, and they're all going to join in it now and go out and tell the world what the cause of war was, and then the world would understand the cause and wars would cease. So the chairman said, "Fine, good night, just a minute, I'll get your coats." So he went into the next room, got their coats, and gave them to the men, gave them to the women, and helped the ladies on with their coats. And they started toward the door. And as they started to go out the door, the chairman said, "Just a minute, please, you forgot something." And they turned around and looked at him, and he said, "Here's some slips that fell out of your coats while they were on the bed. I think they're yours." And he knew what the slips were, and they knew what the slips were. And he saw something that maybe someday, those of you watching this film and seated here tonight, he saw something very, very rare. He saw at that moment, in those 9 people standing at the door, a complete confession, a complete transformation, a total falling away of masks. One woman was embarrassed and hurried out. Another man looked at him with hostility. Another man started to explain. Another woman gave him a surly look. And the chairman knew they were all involved in the very same thing. He knew that all 9 of them were very frequent customers of Crisis Incorporated. When they went out the door and left, he was one human being on earth, at least, who really knew the cause of war. It understood the cause of every ounce of suffering since history began, which is, as he made it more clear to himself as the years went by, which is that human beings, in their present undeveloped, very sick state, will pay any amount of money for the smallest opportunity to have a crisis And the more the merrier, the sicker you are. You understand now, then, that being angry is a self-brought crisis. That being in despair over anything, even over finding the way out, is a self-induced crisis, because as long as you have that, the crisis will keep you so stirred up, so excited, so agitated, that you won't have to think calmly and see your actual condition. Inducing a crisis and cowardice are very closely related. Therefore, knowing how you deliberately invite agitation, fear, trembling, knowing how you deliberately invite it, induce it, and keep it there by fighting with yourself and with others, that's a sign of real heroism. And I'll tell you, that man, that chairman, was a very rare individual, because he understood very clearly that all those people, those 9 people, were marvelous actors and marvelous actresses, and they didn't know it themselves until they were caught, until they were exposed. And what did they do? When found out, they wanted nothing more to do with the man who, having started on the path of higher realities himself, could have helped them. Look what could have happened. Look at what the alternative could have been. When he handed them those slips, which exposed the fact that they were leading a double life, that they were saying one thing and doing another, that they didn't know their actual condition, that they were patrons of the crisis shop itself. They didn't know that. Instead of going into the crisis of getting mad, they could have seen it. Instead of loving the crisis of breaking down in tearful embarrassment and running out, as the one woman did, instead of doing that, she could have stood very still and said, "Do you know, you are right." You know what a turning point is in real spiritual development? A turning point is standing right there when you're accused, when you're confronted, when someone points a fact out to you, staying right there and suffering fully, 100%, but knowing that you're suffering, because you see, when we get caught out of our role, we have no choice but to go into pain. There's no choice. You will go into it, but you can know that you're doing it, which is a different thing from running away from it. All pain, all mental pain, all emotional upset, all hatred, all violence, all scoffing, all sneering, is a part of buying the crisis for the moment. Isn't it strange that human beings choose to do what is going to keep them agitated and miserable, instead of going into a very scientific spiritual study and asking, why did I react like that? The way to go out, to get out of your pain, is to go into it. If you run out the door and tell lies, we have condemned ourselves to doing that for the rest of our lives. And if that's your choice, that's your choice. But can you listen to the instructions that are even trying to get through to you at the moment you reject a truth and say, I prefer the crisis of saying one of 1,000 things that will provoke a crisis in me. For example, I know better. If you know better, you don't have to shout it out angrily. That's the crisis. You scream out, I know better, when you run away. And you say, don't you tell me that. I don't want to hear that. I will tell you, you look at any human problem from a vast international war to a husband and wife having a little quarrel in the home. If you're a scientific detective, you could look at it, investigate it in them or in yourself, and you will find that what I've told you tonight is the exact, precise, and liberating truth. Now the question comes. Do you have the heroism, the real heroism, to see yourself just about to go into that shop, that printing shop, and buy a ready-made crisis? Can you see yourself just about ready to walk into it and take your choice of one of 1,000 and say, no, I am not going to go there again. I am not going to go there again because I sense that it is simply wrong. And what is wrong for me is wrong for my wife, for my husband, for my children, for my country, for the world. I'm going to start with me, not patronizing that shop anymore. Whether other people stop or not is not my concern. I have no command over them. I do have a choice within myself to say, I'm going to start with myself to change the world. You change your world. You change your world. It's the same as changing the whole world, because this is your whole world in here of purity, which has no connection with the false world of impurity out there. So any false concern you have with the exterior world of wars, you had better watch and see where you want a crisis thinking in that regard. Oh, I must save the world. That's crisis thinking in which you've made yourself a false hero, in which you think that you're doing something for someone and you're doing something against everyone. Please be very thoughtful toward the principle which I will now summarize. Lost human beings, sick human beings, cannot survive in their sickness without creating one crisis after another, which means they prefer their sickness to mental health, to spiritual health, to transcending themselves. Your opportunity comes by recognizing that you personally are doing this, that you want to shake. You want to feel sorry for yourself. You want to break down and cry. Because this keeps the false world centered around you, and that is very, very cruel, because you will extend that, your very nature, onto everyone else you meet, and they will shake too, because they're going to repeat, they're going to imitate your behavior and accept it as being right and necessary. Therefore, you have taught them something wrong. You have taught them that a crisis is right when it is really wrong. Teach yourself that a crisis of any kind, is always wrong for you. You want to do something right for yourself, don't forget that. You start tonight to sacrifice some small crisis that you now love. No longer love it. Let it go. And watch how truth begins to give you something that is authentically valuable, so you don't have to run in that shop every day and spend your money foolishly and spend your life foolishly. Truth will show you how to spend your life very wisely and with no crisis at all. I want you to know something. When you get up here in front of this class and you are afraid, and you tell us what your fears are, even if I were to ask you, what are your fears? What are you secretly terrified of that you don't want to tell us about? And then you go ahead and tell us anyway. And you tell us how terrified you are of unexpected events, of being sick, of the world in general. I want to tell you something now. I want to tell you, when you stand up here and you mutter and your eyes dart around the room like that, and you look out at someone, and when you break down, and when you shake, and you don't know what you're doing up here, I want you to know that you are acting out a lie. I want you to know that everything about you is a lie. The scared eyes looking down like that and wondering what to say next, and wondering if we're watching you get nervous and wondering what to say next. Now, I want you to know that that's a lie. Now shift it to home. You're talking to someone on the telephone or talking with someone in person, and you break down. Now, you know what it means to break down, don't you? You ever broke down and cried, or get furious, broken down and get furious, broken down and just fell apart because some event came up that you didn't know how to handle? You couldn't reach into your memory with your bluffs and with your performances and your very sharp answers and your witticisms. Or something happens to you. Something happens to you. You get fired, you get bawled out, you get seen through. And you're at home and you break down. I want you to know also that that is a lying state. And I don't know why, I do know why, but I'm phrasing it that way. I don't know why you won't listen to what I tell you instead of what your stupid mind tells you. Your mind tells you that this is what you have to do, to tremble, to lose control of yourself, to go in self-pitying fear. All the devils on earth are telling you to do that, and you believe them instead of what I tell you, which is that you don't have to do that, and you must not do it anymore. I look out the world and I see people who have just given up. We are here to stop surrendering our souls to darkness. I am telling you, you don't have to crack up again in the face of your husband or wife or the entire world. I'm telling you, you can be poised 100% of your day if you were living from truth. If you know what life is all about and what you are all about, you won't surrender, you won't give up. You won't look at that circumstance and that person and cave in. Now you stop caving in. You stop crying. You stop shaking. You stop letting the world shake you and bluff you. You stop it. And the next time a crisis comes along, you're to remember what I just told you, and you are to fight for yourself. I forbid you to ever shake again. There is nothing nothing in this world, including your own nature, that has power over God, over truth, which you are now saying is a fact. When will you understand there's something more than you in this world? Relying on you is wrecking you. You're still at the stage where you want to enter that crisis shop and buy your goods, and you buy enough to keep you going for a week or a month. You see the supply running low, and you rush back and pay your good money for trash. You stop visiting that shop by cracking up when something happens to you. Nothing is happening to you. It can't. What you're doing is vibrating on a lower level, where a low-level event, a snarl from someone, hits you, and your very low level harmonizes with that, and that's you're asking for the crisis. Stop being who you are, and you'll never crack up. The whole world of 4 billion people and 50 billion devils can attack you, and you'll never crack up. You won't even think about cracking up. There's nothing to do. It's been done. You'll sit there and you'll casually watch 20 billion devils shaking their pitchforks in your face and cursing you and prophesying dire things for you. And you just see them shaking their pitchforks, and nothing happens inside you. Now you stop it. You stop yielding. You stop surrendering. You stop cracking up and saying, this is the way it has to be. I have to be weak. You want to live with truth so that you're the silent conqueror of everything. So that you're such a conqueror, the word conqueror doesn't even come to your mind. It comes to your mind only when you're lost. Stop being yourself. A detective on the police force in a large city went to work one morning, went down to the police headquarters. When he got inside and went to his office, he saw a note on his desk that said, "Please report to the captain." So he went down out in the hall, went down a few doors, turned into the office he needed to go to. And the captain of detectives was there. And the captain invited the detective to sit down, and the captain said, "I have a new assignment for you, a special assignment. Take all the time you need on it." And it's sort of strange, but you've had strange assignments before, I'm sure. But here it is. We had a tip recently that there's a very strange crime going on down in one of the large office buildings down at the corner of 5th and Broadway. And that's the extent of the tip. A very strange crime is going on down there, and we don't know what it is or who's doing it. But it's important enough for me to assign you full-time to it. So drive on down there and do your work and report to me. So the detective took it in stride. He went out in his car, drove on down, went to this huge office building, hundreds of offices, and already he knew how much work he had to do with all these offices, and he's supposed to find out what this crime is that's going on inside it. So he decided, as a logical first step, to go over the building, just look it over, see what it was like. So he started at the bottom floor, walked down the halls looking left and right, then went up steps to the next floor, up, till he had a pretty good general idea of what the office building was like. And what it was like was pretty much typical office building of that kind. It had doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, businessmen, beauty salons, various offices of business, of commerce. And he noticed one, for example, that door that said Surveyors Incorporated. So he had his first general impression of it, but how do you find a very strange sort of crime going on in a huge building like this when you have no idea where to start. But he was an experienced detective, and he used his logic. And he noticed some of the doctors as they came out and some of the lawyers, and he checked them out in the records. And one by one, over the days, he was able to eliminate most of them as possible sources of this crime, whatever it was. A little more work, and all he had left out of that whole building, he was a very efficient detective, all he had left out of the whole building was one office that was marked on the door, Surveyors Incorporated. So kept eyeing that door, and just seemed to be normal business, men and women going out of there and take care of their business and going on home. He decided he'd better take a closer look. So he went inside one day, opened the door and went in, and there was a fairly large room there filled with typical instruments for surveying, land surveying, and there were papers and maps and charts all over the room. Looked pretty ordinary. But there was no one in the room, so he went in and just casually glanced around. And while he was standing there, another door farther back opened, and a woman came out, and she put her hand to her lips like this to shush him. He said, and she whispered to him, "You're late, but come on in. Get in here." She'd come shoot him in. He didn't know what was going on, but she'd invited him in, so he went in another room, and when he went in, it was dark. And it was dark because a film was being played. About 40 or 50 people in the room watching a film. So he took a chair over in a corner there and sat down and watched. And he couldn't understand what the film was all about at first because it had nothing to do with land surveying. Nothing about the countryside or getting boundary lines. And he didn't know what the film was all about at first, so he studied it. And it wasn't long before he understood what was going on in that room, and he understood that he had come to the right place after all. That he had followed orders and found the crime that was going on in that room. And here's what he saw. In this training film, a man was illustrating by picture and voice two things to this audience of 50 people. He was illustrating how to understand weakness and human nature, and two, having understood it, take advantage of it, twist it to your own benefit. It was clear to him. Every word pointed toward that. It was a class in understanding, perceiving, surveying human nature, and then personalizing it to your own benefit, to get what you want. What do you want? You want the money, you want advancement. To use anyone and everyone whose weakness you have detected for your own personal inner and outer advancement. So clear to him what was going on there. And he knew that the title on the door, although misleading to any casual observer, deep down it was just exactly right. It was just what they were doing. They were surveying human nature and then taking advantage of anything they saw of weakness in men and women. The film went on, but having understood this, he got up, he walked out, and drove back to the police station, went up to the captain, and gave the captain a full report on what he'd seen. And for a while, after he'd finished, they sat there quietly looking at each other. And they both understood the same thing by their silence. And the captain spoke first, and he said, "I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking the same thing. A crime most certainly is being committed in that office room. Certainly it is, and we can't do a thing about it." And the reason, the captain continued, the reason we can't do anything about it is because it is too hideous a crime. We can arrest a pickpocket. We can arrest a man for embezzlement. We can arrest a person for assault. We can arrest a person for reckless driving. But isn't this an incredible world, the captain continued, that it is possible for human beings to commit a crime so insidious that no one wants to see it, therefore no action can be taken against it. Certainly no action by the police or by the courts or by the prisons. What a peculiar world, they agreed between each other, that there are crimes so vast that no one sees them, no one understands them, and therefore they continue. Has that ever occurred to you that the depths of the crime of being asleep, the depths is so deep that nobody sees it and nobody wants to do anything about it because of a distorted sense of self-interest, as you heard a few minutes ago, a distorted sense of what you can get, you think, from this world that would make you feel right, make you feel secure, make you feel as if you're having a happy life. Do you know who the teacher of that class was? And do you know that that teacher in that classroom is not in that office, but it's throughout the whole world with all these billions of people doing the same thing and not knowing that they're doing it? Think of the phrase, distorted mind. Now, what's a distorted mind? A distorted mind is simply one that can't think clearly toward its authentic benefit, toward its authentic riches. Therefore, in its sleep, in its distortion, it has to lower itself to tricking other people and get those thrilling rewards. And this is why how the whole lives of every human being practically is spent. The antidote, the cure. What are you teaching yourself? What have you taught yourself today? Because you're not aware of what's going on in that room. Because you're afraid if you look too long at that training film, that you'll find yourself right in the center of it. The fear of self-discovery is what prevents us from doing what is truly right for us. You know, most people hearing the talk like this would say, perhaps, why are you so negative? Why don't you talk about what's right in human nature? Why don't you talk about something that's cheerful? We know that there's crime in the world. You know that there's reckless driving. You know that there's embezzlement. You know that there's assault. And you don't commit those crimes. No, you may not commit those crimes. But what are you doing against yourself by not seeing that you are trying to get something from someone? The smallest good morning makes your day. Right in this room, I refuse to say good morning to you because I know what you want out of it. I know why you want to make eye contact with me. You want to make it because you're weak. You want to make it because you don't know how to live your own life and refusing to learn how you want to lean on someone else, and the answer is no. You've been getting away with a crime against your own existence here on earth long enough. It's time for you to recognize how you won't look and see what kind of a game you're playing, just as those people were doing in that room. All those students came to learn how to exploit other people, how to try to get their energy, how to get their strength, how to get their money. In short, how to depend on them to think for them, and they both fall into the ditch. Isn't this a marvelously positive talk then that you've heard so far tonight? Isn't this most beautiful? Beautiful because you know that now something can be done about it. You've never been able to do anything about it before. I know that, and you know that. So we're agreed. Let's keep the agreement going, where you decide that even the pain you feel at seeing your weakness, the pain you feel at seeing your inadequacy, the seeing of it is good for you. It's healthy for you. It's healthy for you because it's going to help you to change the kind of a mind you have, so that you're not, as you do, so that you're not looking out at the world and looking at another person's face very closely, putting yourself at the mercy of their momentary facial expression. Now do you know what a slave you are? If you don't, I'll tell you that you look at practically everyone, and they seem to be kindly, you're so grateful to them that they seem to smile at you. Or even if they're sort of neutral and don't punish you, you're so grateful you find someone who doesn't slap you psychologically. You're so grateful for that. You've got your sense of gratitude very sadly and badly misplaced. You're grateful for people who keep you where you are. Now, where are you? You're grateful for someone who keeps you in the swamp. You didn't know you were doing that? I am telling you that this is what you have been doing. Very grateful for people who keep you where you are, as you are, with all your pain, all your suffering, and all your dependency on someone else. Wouldn't you like to live your own life? Would you like to be able to walk away from everyone and everything internally? You can. Then when you go back into that world, you won't have to look at anyone's face for reassurance. You won't care because you've got all the assurance you want, 100%. It's all yours, and you know it. When you look at those other people out there with their faces and their desperation and their pleading, you understand them. And then when you understand them, there's no way you can take part in what those people learned in the training film. There's no way you can ever descend to doing what they were doing. You're not a surveyor for your own personal gain. Instead, you look out at the world with a perfect understanding of it, because you first looked inside your own world and understood it, first understanding how it did want to exploit other people, how hungry it was, how desperate it was to get someone to say, you're okay, you're all right. And you found plenty of people in plenty of circumstances. You found the raise, and you found the home, and you found the woman, and you found the man, and you found the friends, and you found the picnics, and you found the drinks, and they all said, you're okay. But you know you weren't. I'll tell you how you can really feel okay. 100% independent of the entire world and everyone in it. And you can start by seeing the enormity of invisible crime, where everyone is committing it, and committing it in the name of decency, committing it in the name of self-change, committing it in the name of God and of religion. Everyone is committing it. And if that frightens you, that statement I made, you investigate and find out why you're frightened, because your fear is a part of your problem. And if you could get to the point where you say, I see my fear, I understand my trembling at some of the things I've heard here tonight, I understand that. If you could get to the point where you can see your fear, stand apart from a little bit, see that. That will be the beginning of you becoming a person who is never again going to hurt anyone else, as you are now doing. It is the level that hurts. And everyone who's a part of that very low level has no choice but to hurt everyone. I saw your faces. I looked around. I watched you people very closely. And I see your faces, and I see your desperation, and I see your weakness. And I know one thing about you. You have a chance, as long as you're here. You have a chance not to be a victim of your own ignorance. You have a chance to break out from the heaviness in you, and that heaviness in you screams out, this is the way it has to stay, and I will tell you that's a lie. Now you listen to what I'm telling you instead of your own screams of despair, your own heavy spirits. Your heavy gloom and depression is nothing more than a fond habit. Now we've unmasked it a little bit. It's nothing more than a fond habit, and you can break it. You don't have to be the habit anymore. Whether you know it or not, I am telling you that you can walk in the sun instead of in the darkness of your own nature. All you know is the darkness of your fears and tears. That's all you know. I am telling you there is something else. And that something else is the sunshine of a truly spiritual life. You can know exactly what I am talking about if you will go through one little step at a time. If you're down in that dark dungeon, take one step up. You've done it tonight by coming here. Take that one step up, then another step, till the time comes when you'll know the difference between light and darkness, because now you get a glimpse of light. When you're in total darkness, you always call that darkness light. I know what is right for me. I know what is best. And your despair is enormous, isn't it? This class, these teachings, the truth that's in this class, the truth that's in this class will lead you very gently, very kindly, very compassionately, very patiently. The truth that's taught in this class will lead you halfway up the steps. And at that halfway mark, you will begin to sense what it means to have the love of truth in your life, because you will have glimpsed the light up the door there, up at the other half of the steps. You know the difference now. There's darkness down there. You look down there and you see the darkness. You see the fumbling of your past life. All you had some petty little project that occupied your whole day. Get the clothesline straight out in the backyard. That was your whole project, so the neighbors wouldn't see you had crooked clothesline. How's that for an ambition? I'm not kidding, am I? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And you look back and you see all this clothesline thinking in your life. You look and see it down. You're halfway up the steps and you look back and you see that clothesline thinking that you know that's darkness. And you turn around and you look up and you see that little gleam of light. You know that has nothing to do with the clothesline or with impressing your neighbors or the whole thing. They don't dislike you. When you see that, you'll climb up fast. And when you get out there into the sunshine, you won't be the same kind of a person that you are seated here tonight. And you don't have to imagine what it is. You do have to do one thing. You have to start climbing. And you have to see the climb very deeply and see that everybody's engaged in it. It's not going on just in that office. It's going on in the office next door, and the building next door, and the building in the next city, and then the next country. The whole world is engaged in it, and they don't know what they're doing. We're surveying human nature, including our own human nature, for a very lofty, noble purpose. The noble purpose of never again hurting any other human being, including ourselves. Now that's a noble purpose. And when you have that, when you've achieved that, you will have all else. When you're standing alone, when you won't give anyone anything that contributes to their weakness, because you are not going to be a part of that weakness in any way, you'll know what it means to walk in this sunlight that we talked about. Let me say that same thing in another way. I want you to know that in your present unconscious desperation, you will trade part of you for a part of another person. And you're both trading false parts. But when you get a smile from the other person, the thrill of it says, ah, I am real after all. I am permanent after all. That person smiled at me, complimented me, approved of me. Therefore, I can go on the way I am without fear. But it doesn't work. The other person says, you're just marvelous. And the word marvelous then goes into your psychic system. You vibrate with it and then name it and say, I am marvelous. You have done nothing but take a sound out of the air, brought it into your mind, associated the word marvelous with good things like a marvelous sunset, a marvelous dinner, a marvelous evening we had together. Now the word marvelous, with all its associations, points down toward what you call your I, associates with it, gets all mixed up with it, and you become then utterly forgetful of everything except the vibration, I am marvelous. What you're doing is saying that dinner was marvelous. What you're saying that sunset was marvelous. And you've transferred the association and the feeling, the emotion, and the idea with the equally false idea of I, of yourself. So all these elements are thrown into the big bucket and get all mixed up, and the coming together of them causes a fiery feeling which you call I, and which you hope now is going to continue. And because you feel so good at the churning inside yourself, you don't want to let it go. Now look what you have done. You have made reality your enemy and falsehood your friend. And everyone else in the world is going to be in that conspiracy because they want the same thing that you do, which is simply a feeling of being right instead of actually being right. Can you give the whole thing up? Refused to even trade a false smile with someone, which does not mean you're unpleasant. You're unpleasant now as you are giving out all those phony smiles. You know that, don't you? Don't you know that it's very cruel to be a phony? Don't you know that everybody is doing this, therefore you're not unique at all? You're just another one of the gang playing the same game. And every one of those people thinking they're playing the game really believe in their sick little hearts that they are unique, that they're individualistic, that they're just a joyous contribution to the world. You want something now for your new self. See, all these previous years we wanted something for our old warrior-like nature. That's what we wanted. We wanted other people to give us guns, and we'd give them machine guns, hand grenades. We were trading weapons all the time. And we saw that when you fool around with weapons, machine guns, hand grenades, cannons, whatever, when you fool around with those, you get hurt and the other person gets hurt. It's dangerous to fool around with guns, isn't it? But we wanted these guns because of the excitement of it. Going hunting, firing, knocking someone down, and the fearful, wrong, pleasant excitement of dodging the bullets from the other person. We had pictures of ourselves being a great romantic soldier, winning the battle, retreating when necessary, being cunning about it, attributing cunning to ourselves. All this time now, we thought we were giving ourselves something, and all we were doing is keeping a sick illusion going. Therefore, you can't give anything to an illusion. Here's an invisible man standing here. Here's a man standing here who doesn't exist, right in front of where I'm seated here. Now you try to give that man an apple, try to give him a rake, try to give him a plate. You can't give him anything because he doesn't exist. But we think that we are somebody who can receive things. So what we receive is 1,000 varieties of falsehoods, of artificial goodnesses. Artificial. Money is artificial. The love of mankind is artificial. And we've been getting these things to ourselves and falling into this thrillism I talked about and calling that delusion our reality. Not seeing through it and fighting anyone who tries to take it away from us. To go on with your question. We have seen through that. We have seen no matter how many women we have, gentlemen, know how much money we have, how much promotion, how much prestige. We want to break down and cry because we don't know what's going on. And we have seen that honestly. Here I'm seated, you're seated in your $500,000 home, that enormous living room with a great view of the lake. And your family's there, and a few friends have come over for dinner. You've got everything. You've got even your time planned after the company leaves. Your favorite TV show. You're going to have a drink. You've got all this planned. And in back of all the planning is the cry. I don't know what it's all about. You're afraid to investigate. You're afraid to find out what it's all about. All right. To those of you here and listening to me, those of you here who continue with this, as you understand that your false self, listen please, your false self can't be given anything real. There's no need for you to give it anything. What a relief. I don't have to have that $500,000 home. Thank God. I don't have to have those friends over. I don't have to have that drink. I don't have to have all those exciting little plans where everyone who comes along, I tell them about my exciting little plans. Thank God I don't have to have them. There's no one to give them to. I'm not here to get those things. I never was, but I didn't know it till now. Those prizes, those rewards will start to fade out. Now I know what rewards I really want. I want to be free from the torment of thinking I have to get something. My reward is the realization that I can just exist. My prize is knowing that I can just live. I can just live. And I begin to see that. I have nothing to get, no place to go, nothing to do. Never bound by the daily tasks. They will be done for you too. Truth is living your life for you. Now you can be anywhere you want to be, in a $500,000 home, or the little cottage, or wherever. What difference does it make? You know every second where you are internally. You know where you are. That kingdom is always safe. It's always full. It's always pure. The kingdom within never wants or needs anything. It has it. It has eternal life. It has it right now. What a relief. What a great sigh of relief to know that the world out there or the world in here has nothing to give me and nothing to take away. Thank heaven I pursued it to this solution, to the spiritual solution. Now you know, and that is it. It is done. Then truth does everything else throughout eternity for you. Do you know that as you're seated here now, spiritually speaking, you don't need a thing. If you say, I need God, you've already pushed God away. If you say, I need to live in truth, if you say, I need to live in truth, you've pushed truth away. The very fact that you said that brought time into the factor. I've got to look around and find truth. You can't find truth. You can only dissolve your false yearning for your false truth. You understand you have a false truth, a substitute? Stop seeking your version of what God, truth, and reality is. Stop seeking your version, which is gonna jolt you. It's going to make you terribly uncomfortable for a number of years. You stop seeking your substitute truth and just learn to live without it. And after many years of going through a horrible internal shaking up, you'll start to settle down. And then your own state will be the evidence that you were doing the right thing all these years. I've used a phrase every once in a while that I'll repeat now. And let's see what it means to you. One day, all of you here who are working earnestly will know that you were right after all. I'm talking about the budding truth in you was right after all. Then we have all these doubts. For example, in the simplest of things of economy. Don't you know economy in ordinary life is a spiritual power and virtue? Economy is a virtue, a spiritual virtue. And yet you hear all this talk, oh, you're cheap, you won't buy this or that. Or you should expand your life and get the good things of life. They're available here in this country. But there's something in you that wants some simplicity more than acquisition. That's right, after all. And if everyone had that, there wouldn't be a single hungry person in the world. Everyone would have a home. Everyone would have everything. The world has plenty for everyone. But not the way it is now. You will see that something in you was accurate after all. Another example, your reluctance to go along with tempting people, with people who want to drag you down, Isn't there something in you that senses that it's wrong to go along with them? With that bad language, for example? With the plans they have? With that exciting place they want to go to and they want to drag you along with it? Can't you sense there's a part in you that say, no, I don't want to go. I want to stay home and do what I want to do. Pray for the day. Pray that it comes very soon, that you see that you were right after all and not wanting to be dragged out against your will. You couldn't say no, could you? Learn to say no. And if they come around and try another trick, say no again. Say no again. Say no again. And they'll go away, and they'll come back the next day and try again. Say no again. A year later, they'll come back, say no again. After a while, it becomes easy. You know what you want, and you know what you don't want. And you don't want to go back to where you used to be internally. Let me tell you something. The victory is won. It is done. It actually is done right now. The prize that you want to win is available to you right now. Get yourself out of the way. Drop yourself. Stop thinking about what I'm trying to say and see that your thoughts can't possibly understand it. Now, there is a very short pause, perhaps in Dauphine, perhaps in Rudy, perhaps in Leland. There's a very short pause in this room while the meeting is going on, in your minds, all of you perhaps. A short pause in which you have yielded yourself to truth so that the intellect does begin to slow down a little bit, and right in between those two thoughts, a right feeling comes, something very profound. And when that feeling creeps in, you get these ideas which you verbalize and which I verbalize by saying, thank heaven, there's something different. Now that's your glimpse of understanding the non-existence of time. What you want here can never be gained through thinking, because all thinking is in time. It can't be gained by you because there's no you to get it. When you understand all this, then time collapses and you understand that it was here all now I say the word time, don't I? That it was here eternally, that it was always here. And you could have had it had you surrendered 100% more instead of a little 1% here and 2% there and then withdrawing that. Notice for yourself then how right in the middle of this meeting at any time from start to finish, how a certain right exaltation comes up in you, and it says, the right exaltation says, I understand. That is your understanding now. It's the understanding of truth that has become yours. And is there any hard work? Do you suppose that God has any hard work understanding himself? Do you suppose that truth makes an effort to make the universe run? It's the simplest thing. Because truth and the operation are one thing. It isn't difficult for you to just walk down the street, is it? You're all integrated in yourself physically. Your arms move, your legs move, your mind moves. It all happens spontaneously because you're integrated, at least in that way. Truth is so integrated, it does everything with ease, and it does it right now. Once upon a time, there was a good and kindly king, and he ruled over a happy, beautiful land. And the king, in one of his tours around his kingdom one day, went to the edge of it where there was a canyon, and across the very wide canyon was another country. And there was this chasm, canyon between his good country and the other country over there. And he knew the nature of both his own country and this other nation across the very wide canyon. And being a good and kindly king, he said to himself, there may be people living over in that far country who are unhappy, who are miserable, who are uncertain about themselves and about life. And there may be a few of them who are qualified to enter this beautiful country. So, thinking about it, he decided to have his Royal Engineers build a bridge from his country to the desert country, where there were tens of thousands of unhappy, quarreling, sour people. So the engineers built a very narrow bridge, but very strong, absolutely safe. But it was narrow so that only one person could cross at a time. They'd have to come in single file. So he built the bridge, and then he called in one of his officers, one of his trusted officers. He said, I'm going to put you in charge of the bridge. You're the guard. And you're to stand on the far end of it in the other country at the entrance of the bridge. And you're to guard against people coming in who don't belong in our country. Certain people will qualify for it, and I'll tell you how you're going to make the determination as to who is qualified and who isn't. I want you to make a big sign and put it alongside the entrance to the bridge. And the sign will just say who can come over and who can't. And the way you decide that is to tell everyone who comes up to the bridge and wants to pass over to our beautiful country, the sign will tell them what they can't bring over. And there will be a list of things that they can't bring over into the new country if they want to come here and become a citizen of it. For example, and I'll give you details, but for example, they can't bring their weapons over. They can't bring any guns. You can't bring anything that's considered weaponry. That has to be laid aside over there, and they have to come over without it. Also, for example, they can't bring over their books of religion and philosophy. Their religions and philosophies have to remain on the other side. And you're to stand there, and those who agree to leave behind these forbidden items can enter the new country and be happy human beings. So officer said, fine, sir, your majesty, I'll carry out your instructions faithfully. King said, okay, go over there now, and if you have any problems, come and let me know. Let me tell you, officer, those people over there are just one short inch above the level of animals. They're very bad people, evil people, and they're tricky people. So you be alert every minute, because I know what's going to happen to you over there, but this is good for you. It'll help you grow inwardly yourself. You'll become a better officer, more fit for the kingdom you now live in. So the officer went over and he put up the sign, weapons forbidden, your religious books and philosophical books forbidden, and waited for people to come up to the bridge and try to pass over, and of course they did. And they would come up and they would smile a lot, the people of this unhappy country. They'd smile at the officer in charge of things. And they would talk about the other land and say, may I now pass over? And the guard would say, well, first of all, please read the sign. And so they read the sign. No weapons, none of your religious books. And after reading the sign, they started to talk to the officer about it. They started to discuss it. And they asked questions, and some of them were antagonistic. And they argued with the officer. They said, well, look, we're going over there. We may need our weapons over there. We have to protect ourselves, you know. And why can't we have our religious? We don't understand that.
Every man must have his religion, whatever it might be, or philosophy. We don't understand why we can't bring our philosophies over there. Well, this was a new experience to the officer, and he didn't quite know how to handle it. So he talked to them, and he tried to explain it as best as he understood it. These are the king's orders, and he wasn't on the level of wisdom of the king, so he explained to them, well, the king gave the orders, he must know what he's doing. So this is what it says there, and all I can do is refer you back to the sign. This happened for a whole week, several weeks, as a matter of fact. And the officer began to get a little bit irritated and a little bit bewildered. He couldn't understand why it was so. Why people would stand there and argue, and they'd see the sign there and then start arguing him. And no one came over. No one was allowed to pass over because it was a strict rule. They didn't leave their weapons behind, that they couldn't come over, so nobody passed over. Well, the officer wanted to know more about what he was doing there. He wanted to be a better officer, so he went back to the palace, the royal palace, and went up to the king and said, Your Majesty, you said that if I had any problems, I could come back and go into them with you. King said, fine, what's the problem over there? And the officer related everything that had happened. That people would come up and they would argue and they would try to persuade him to let him take the weapons over into the new country. And it was getting on his nerves a little bit, the officer admitted. And all the time that the guard officer was talking, the king was nodding a little bit. He was understanding everything that the guard was saying. So when the guard was all through, the king nodded and said, I understand. I knew this would happen, but I put you over there for your own development too, as well as for doing a necessary task. This will make you a better officer in the kingdom, having been over there. So I'll tell you what to do next. I'm going to write a little note on a piece of paper. I'm going to give it to you. And when you get back over to the bridge, I want you to add this to the sign you already have. I want you to add one more line to it at the bottom. Take your brush and paint and board and tack it onto the bottom of the sign you already have of forbidden items. So the officer said, thank you, sir, and put the slip in his pocket, went on back, crossed the bridge, got over there and pulled out the slip and read it. And he was delighted with what he saw. The little simple sentence. He said, when I put that down at the bottom of the sign, it'll solve all my problems. People will understand. And I'll just be at peace here. I just admit people or deny them according to what they want. They either leave their weapons behind and come over, or they don't come over and keep their weapons. So he took a brush and painted the new sign, put it at the bottom. And the sign read, listen to this, the sign read, there is nothing to talk about. There is nothing to talk about. So there it was on the bottom. Forbidden things to bring into the country. And at the bottom, there's nothing to talk about. People came up to the start of the bridge again, and they looked at the sign, and they started to talk about it. And the officer said, look, by the king's instructions, there's nothing to talk about. Look at the bottom of that. But they continued to talk about it. They wanted to discuss. They wanted to bring it in it. They wanted to be reasonable. And he said, there's nothing to talk about. They kept talking. He said, there's nothing to talk about. They kept talking. Those who passed over the bridge understood what the bottom line meant, what it was all about. Do you understand it? Those of you who write me little notes and hand me little letters before the meeting sometimes, and used to telephone me, but 99% in your own mind, you think there's something to talk about. There is nothing to talk about. And if I was that king, I would add under that, there's nothing to talk about, I would add another sign that would say, take it or leave it. And I'll tell you, you had better take this or you had better leave it. It's the only choice you've got in this class. And if you were to do that, if you were to take it, that is, you would understand what we're trying to get at. If you were to leave your weapons and your phony philosophies behind, you would understand, as the people did over on the other side when they went all by themselves, carrying nothing. When they went over there, when they got to the underside, they would understand then and then only why it is necessary. You see, you can't bring your present ways of thinking into the kingdom of heaven. You think that the kingdom of heaven is simply a modification of your present desert land. You think, well, a few things are changed, but that's all, just a little minor change, and you think that you can bring your weapons over, your hostility, for example. You think you can bring it over, and it's only when you take it or leave it and decide to take it, that is, take the lesson, and leave your weapons behind, your sourness, your critical spirit, which is fear. We know that. When you're critical, you're a scared human being. When you get over on the other side and you put your first foot down there and you look around and you understand what's going on in that kingdom where the king reigns, the beautiful kingdom, when you get over there, you'll see how foolish, how lack of sense you had in thinking that it was necessary to bring the weapons and your philosophies and religious thoughts over there, because over on that kingdom they are not necessary. But you're thinking in terms of necessary now because you're still in ego protection, where you do have to protect yourself against people who are going to hurt your feelings.
Stop being yourself. And you'll understand every word I've told you tonight. Good night.